Imagine for a second that you are just sitting on your couch after a long day. You're casually scrolling through your phone,
Right, it's
right?
just a normal evening.
Exactly. And you see an ad for a product you swear you only just thought about. You know the feeling. You never even typed it into a search bar.
Never mentioned it out loud.
Yeah. You just brush it off as a weird, maybe slightly creepy coincidence. But then you swipe over to a news app and you're confronted with these massive headlines.
The really heavy stuff.
Right. Headlines about untouchable billionaires, huge international scandals, and these secret networks that seem to completely vanish into thin air just as quickly as they are exposed to the public.
And for most of us, these feel like totally isolated phenomena.
Completely. You've got a creepy tech coincidence happening over here and a corrupt politician doing something shady over there. But what if they aren't isolated at all?
It's a heavy question.
It is. What if instead you're actually looking at the highly interconnected layers of a global architecture of power?
It is a genuinely chilling thought, but an absolutely essential one to explore if we want to make sense of the current global landscape.
Definitely.
To truly understand the modern world, we have to look past the surface-level headlines. We have to look past the daily political theater that dominates the news cycles.
Because it is theater, a lot of it.
It really is. We need to examine what you could call the underlying plumbing of power. We are talking about the systems, the technologies, and the institutional structures that operate continuously, regardless of who happens to be, temporarily occupying an elected office in any given country.
Welcome to this deep dive into exactly that hidden architecture. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore a truly fascinating, deeply complex, and honestly a sometimes incredibly dark set of source materials.
Very dark.
Yeah. We are looking at an in-depth, expansive interview featuring a technology and power dynamics expert named Yuri Van Geest. And in this discussion, he meticulously breaks down the historical evolution of global intelligence, the actual mechanics of elite blackmail, and the rather frightening trajectory of mass surveillance and data harvesting.
And before we dive into the deep end of this material,
Yeah.
it is absolutely vital that we set the stage regarding the nature of what we are about to discuss.
Good point. We need to be clear about this.
Yes. The concepts and the highly specific historical events detailed in our source touch on incredibly sensitive, politically charged figures. And this spans the entire global political spectrum.
We're talking left, right, center, all of it.
Exactly. We are talking about references to the Trump administration, the Clintons, major global NGOs, international leaders, and massively powerful corporate entities.
That is a crucial point, and we need to be crystal clear with you, the listener, right up front. Our job today is to impartially report the claims, the theories, and the historical connections exactly as they were presented in the source material.
Right. We are not picking a side.
Not at all. We are not endorsing any political side here, nor are we validating these sweeping claims as absolute, undeniable truth. Our goal is simply to map out the ideas that Yuri and the original speakers presented so you can understand the overarching theories being proposed about how hidden power actually functions in our world.
Precisely. We are acting as your guides through a very dense, often murky forest of information. The source approaches this entire topic not as a partisan issue.
Which is how these things are usually framed in the media.
Exactly, but as a systemic one.
Oh.
The core argument is that power operates through very specific, calculated mechanisms that have been refined over decades, if not centuries.
So let's start right at the foundation of that argument. When we think of intelligence gathering or spy networks, I think most of us immediately picture the Cold War.
Sure. Trench coats in Berlin.
Yeah, trench coats, or maybe the founding of the CIA after World War II. But the interview points out that intelligence gathering isn't some modern invention at all. It traces the concept back roughly 5,000 years, all the way to the ancient Egyptians.
It's an ancient practice.
But the overarching theory here is that while the concept is ancient, the execution has radically evolved in three distinct ways: scale, speed, and complexity.
Those three vectors are crucial to grasping the modern reality. Let's look at scale first. For millennia, intelligence was a highly localized effort.
It was tribal.
Right, tribal, or at most, national. You were spying on the army across the river or the neighboring kingdom. Today, that scale has expanded to a completely planetary, worldwide grid. There is no longer a localized theater of operation. The globe itself is the theater.
And the second vector, speed, seems to have completely altered the utility of that information.
It changes everything. Historically, intelligence was incredibly slow. It relied on physical travel, a spy riding a horse across a continent, delayed communications via encrypted letters, manual human processing.
It could take months.
Exactly. The information was often weeks or months old by the time a decision maker actually received it. Today, the defining characteristic of intelligence is real-time, instantaneous surveillance. Action can be taken the very second an event occurs.
Which feeds directly into the third vector, complexity. The interview outlines this transition beautifully. We moved from an era relying purely on human spies.
What the intelligence community calls human intelligence or human inte.
Right, human-inte. To the era of signals intelligence. That's the Enigma machine, early digital codes, tapping telegraph wires. But now we've moved past even that into today's massive AI-driven data systems capable of linking completely disparate events, people, and financial systems in the blink of an eye.
The technological leap is staggering.
There is an analogy from the discussion that really struck me as a perfect illustration of this shift. They contrast the old days of espionage with today. In the past, the source notes, a highly trained spy might know the exact sender of a physical letter not by the handwriting, but by the highly specific, prearranged way the paper itself was folded.
It was a deeply physical, analog tell.
Now, you compare that quaint, almost romantic idea of a folded piece of paper to today's digital panopticon, where every keystroke, location, ping, and financial transaction is permanently logged.
It's a completely different universe.
But the interview argues that simply gathering this information isn't enough. To truly maintain power and control, these intelligence mechanisms are organized into an architecture, specifically 4 distinct layers of hidden power.
This is where the source material gets incredibly analytical. It outlines how these 4 pillars operate as a stacked, interdependent system. They don't function in isolation. They are a hierarchy of leverage.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The first pillar, the foundation of modern control, is data and information. You can think of this as the software layer.
Let's break that down. When we say data and information in this context, we aren't just talking about knowing someone's address, right?
No, we are talking about totalized awareness. This involves comprehensive surveillance, the application of artificial intelligence to predict behavioral patterns, monitoring all forms of private and public communications.
And ultimately using that data to subtly manipulate behavior.
Exactly. It is the baseline of modern control because it allows power structures to anticipate and manage threats before they ever materialize.
Okay, so that's layer 1, the software layer. But what happens if simply monitoring someone or knowing their general secrets isn't enough to control them? What if a politician or a powerful CEO decides to go off script and act against the interests of this hidden architecture?
That brings us to layer 2, which the source identifies as blackmail and honey traps.
Ah, the really messy stuff.
In intelligence jargon, this is universally referred to as compromat. This is a much more aggressive, targeted application of power. This is where you deliberately compromise a target. Historically, and as detailed extensively in the source, this often involves luring the target into illicit, illegal, or deeply taboo acts, frequently involving young men or women.
And the crucial element here, the mechanism that makes it actual compromat, is that it is all captured on camera or meticulously documented.
It has to be documented to be useful.
Right. According to the interview, this specific layer, this highly organized gathering of ruinous blackmail, is the absolute core function of the operations run by figures like Jeffrey Epstein. It wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was an intelligence gathering mechanism for layer 2.
And what's fascinating here is how highly effective it is, because it bypasses all legal and institutional defenses. You don't need to defeat a compromised politician in an election.
Or win a court case against them.
No, you simply show them the tape, and they become a permanent asset.
But let's say layer 2 isn't applicable. Maybe the target is incredibly disciplined, or they simply don't have those particular vulnerabilities. What does the system do then?
If the target cannot be blackmailed, the system escalates to layer 3, financial corruption and lobbying. Now, we aren't talking about a classic movie scene with a briefcase full of unmarked bills slid across a table.
Wow, this is way bigger than that.
This is the brute force application of massive capital on a structural scale.
Right. The interview describes this as buying influence in a way that fundamentally alters the playing field. It involves using enormous, almost incomprehensible sums of money to bend institutional rules, legally rewrite laws through massive lobbying efforts,
And effectively purchase the compliance of key figures, entire regulatory bodies, or media conglomerates. It is the financial capture of the system itself.
Exactly. But there are rare instances where a target is completely unblackmailable, and they are ideologically driven to the point where they are entirely incorruptible by money. They refuse the data manipulation, they sidestep the honey traps, and they reject the billions. What happens then?
And that brings us to the fourth and final layer of this architecture, the absolute last resort, violence.
Violence.
If the system cannot monitor them into submission, if it cannot blackmail them into compliance, and if it cannot buy their loyalty, the final pillar of power is physical elimination.
It is incredibly grim to lay it out like that. But when you look at it the way Yuri breaks it down, it resembles an incredibly high-stakes, entirely ruthless corporate strategy.
It is essentially a brutal decision tree. The system is designed to always attempt the path of least resistance first, which today is data and psychological manipulation.
It is clean, it is cheap, and it is largely invisible.
Yes. If that encounters friction, it escalates to the messy world of human blackmail. If the target proves unblackmailable, you deploy capital to buy them. If they are an anomaly who is incorruptible,
They are eliminated. The core argument being presented here is that true power in the modern world does not lie in the traditional mechanisms we are taught to revere.
not all.
And I want you to just pause and think about that for a second. How do you personally view power? We are conditioned from a very young age to look at the politicians debating on our television screens, the voting booths, and our constitutional laws as the ultimate arbiters of our reality.
We think the person standing at the podium is running the show.
But the source is arguing that the actual architecture dictating reality, the force that truly steers global events, is this underlying informal bureaucracy operating through these four shadowy layers.
It completely flips the traditional narrative of civics on its head. It suggests that the formal bureaucracy, the elected officials, are often just middle management, while the informal bureaucracy holds the actual leverage.
Which naturally leads to a really wild, almost surreal question. If this massive hidden world of intelligence, blackmail, and structural power truly exists on this scale, how does it interact with our everyday lives? How do we not see it?
That's the billion-dollar question.
And the source makes a very provocative claim here. We actually do see it. It often leaks out quite deliberately through the media and the pop culture we consume every single day.
This is a psychological and sociological concept, often referred to as hiding in plain sight. The interview argues that intelligence agencies and these hidden power structures frequently and very purposefully reveal their methods, their technologies, and their overarching philosophies to the public through movies, television, and mass entertainment.
It sounds like a paradox. Why would a secret organization broadcast its secrets?
It does seem strange at first.
But the interview lists several major films that serve almost like a canary in the coal mine for what is actually happening behind the curtain. They mention Argo, pointing out that it is a matter of public record that the CIA literally helped with the production of that film, managing how their history was portrayed.
They were very involved.
They also list The Report, the Robert Redford film 3 Days of the Condor from 1975, and the Tom Cruise movie American Made. Robert De Niro's The Good Shepherd is also highlighted as one of the best examples of this.
The inclusion of these specific films in the discussion is very deliberate. It highlights a historically porous boundary between the intelligence community and Hollywood. The intelligence apparatus has long understood that the most effective way to shape public perception isn't through press releases, but through narrative storytelling.
But the source dedicates a massive amount of focus to a very specific, highly symbolic film, one that came out in 1999, directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut.
A fascinating film.
I am so glad we are digging into this because this part of the discussion blew my mind. Here's where it gets really interesting. Eyes Wide Shut is already infamous for its incredibly dark themes. It is a nearly 3-hour exploration of secret societies, ultra-elite, masked sex rings, and dark ritualistic power operating just beneath the surface of high society New York.
The overt themes are dark enough on their own.
Right. But Yuri points out a highly specific, incredibly subtle detail in the very final scene of the movie. It's a detail that is so easy to miss if you aren't looking for the architecture of power we just discussed.
It is a masterclass in visual subtext.
Exactly. So picture the scene. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's characters have just been through this harrowing, reality-shattering ordeal regarding this secret society. They are now walking through a brightly lit, totally mundane toy store with their young daughter.
A very normal setting.
The lighting is warm, The dialogue is about Christmas shopping, and they are having this intense conversation that seemingly resolves the massive marital and psychological tension of the entire film. They are agreeing to just go back to normal life.
It presents the facade of safety. The conscious mind of the viewer is focused on the resolution of the couple's relationship in this innocent setting.
But while they are talking, the source notes that if you pull your eyes away from the main characters and look deep into the background of the shot, there are two men. And these aren't just extras. These are the exact same two men who have been menacingly following Tom Cruise's character throughout the entire film, acting as the enforcers for this elite secret society.
The same exact men.
And in this final, brightly lit toy store scene, subtly, almost out of focus in the background, you see these two men taking the couple's young daughter away by the hand.
It is an absolutely chilling visual metaphor, entirely communicated in the background of a scene that is ostensibly about domestic reconciliation. Kubrick is communicating something profound here.
The interview really lingers on the profound timing and the bizarre context surrounding this film. Stanley Kubrick, known for his obsessive perfectionism, died suddenly, just days after showing the final cut to the studio.
Before the film was even released to the public.
Yes, the source notes that this timing has spawned its own myriad of theories regarding what he was trying to expose. But even more importantly, the film was released in 1999. The source explicitly notes that 1999 is the exact same time period when the very first female victims of the actual real-world Epstein network were beginning to come forward to local authorities.
The parallels are impossible to ignore. The source is essentially asking us to look at this masterpiece and ask, what was Kubrick trying to communicate to the subconscious of the audience? It heavily implies he had intimate knowledge of these elite, state-sponsored honey trap rings that were operating in elite circles, and he was putting it on screen.
But this brings us back to that massive paradox. Let's assume these deeply secret, ruthless structures exist exactly as described. Why on earth would they allow themselves to be portrayed in massive Hollywood blockbusters featuring the biggest movie stars on the planet? Doesn't that risk exposing them?
It seems counterintuitive, but this raises a vital point about the psychology of mass media and societal conditioning. The source speculates that allowing or even encouraging these portrayals serves a massive normalization function.
Normalization.
Yes, by taking these terrifying realities, elite blackmail rings, total surveillance, deep state assassins, and putting them into blockbuster movies with popcorn and dramatic music, it recontextualizes them. It takes actual systemic threats and turns them into mere movie plots in the collective public subconscious.
Oh, wow. So it is a defense mechanism.
Precisely. Think about how it plays out in reality. If a journalist or a whistleblower tries to expose a real secret society or a real intelligence blackmail ring, what is the public's immediate conditioned reaction? The first thing people say is, oh, come on, you've been watching too many spy movies.
Or that sounds like a Bond villain.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. The interview calls it fiction washing. By constantly exposing the public to exaggerated, fictionalized versions of the truth, you preemptively discredit the actual truth when it finally comes out. It fiction washes reality.
It's a very effective tactic.
And if movies are the fiction wash version of how this works, the source then takes us into the very real, heavily documented, and brutal history of how these blackmail rings actually operate in the real world.
This is where we transition from the theory of power to the historical application of it. We are looking at the lineage of the people who actually run these operations.
And the source makes a crucial, fundamental point here that shatters the mainstream narrative. Jeffrey Epstein was not a lone anomaly.
Not at all.
He wasn't just some singular, bizarre criminal mastermind who uniquely manipulated his way to the top of society out of nowhere. He was simply filling a very specific, pre-existing role in a long historical lineage.
The interview refers to this highly specific role as the broker of brokers. This is not a common criminal. This is a highly specialized, deeply protected individual whose entire function is to act as the human switchboard connecting the various factions of global power.
A human switchboard.
Exactly. They unite and manage the intersections between organized crime mafias, state intelligence agencies, and the legitimate global elite. The politicians, the CEOs, the scientists. They are the human operators for the four pillars of power we discussed earlier.
Right, and the source doesn't just theorize about this role. They map out this lineage chronologically over the last century. From the 1930s through the 1960s, they state this vital role of connecting the underworld to the upper world was played by Meyer Lansky.
Lansky was known as the mob's accountant.
But the interview suggests his ties to intelligence and the political elite went far deeper than just running casinos in Havana. He was the broker of that era. Then the era shifts. We move into the 1980s and 1990s, and a new figure takes the mantle of the broker of brokers, a man named Robert Maxwell.
Robert Maxwell is an incredibly significant, almost larger-than-life figure in this narrative, and it is vital to understand that his importance extends far beyond simply being the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. According to the deep dive in the source material, Robert Maxwell was a massive, globally influential media tycoon. He built an empire.
He owned a lot of media.
He did. He owned the Mirror group of newspapers in the UK, he owned the New York Daily News, and crucially, he owned Macmillan textbooks.
The interview puts a massive emphasis on that Macmillan acquisition. Maxwell bought that publishing house for $2.6 billion in 1988. And Urey asks a brilliant, chilling question regarding this. How do you keep a population in line over generations? You ensure you have the textbooks.
It is the ultimate application of the first pillar of power, data, and information.
It isn't just about printing news for today. It is about controlling the baseline historical and scientific reality taught to the next generation.
If you control the textbooks, you control the parameters of acceptable thought. But Maxwell's media baron persona was allegedly just the public-facing layer of his operations. The source presents the widely held intelligence claim that Robert Maxwell was actually operating as a triple spy.
A triple spy?
Yes. He was allegedly working simultaneously and dangerously for Israel's Mossad, the Soviet Union's KGB, and Britain's MI6.
Just managing the logistics of that is mind-boggling. But financially, the source points out that his entire empire was built on a massive, unstable house of cards. He financed these billion-dollar acquisitions with a dizzying web of loans from 44 different international banks.
It was completely unsustainable.
And when he eventually died, the sheer scale of his fraud was exposed. It was revealed he had completely looted his own companies. He had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars, around $600 million, according to the figures cited in the interview, straight from the pension funds of his own employees at the Mirror Group, just to keep his empire afloat.
And the circumstances surrounding his death are where this story connects directly and fatally to the ruthless mechanics of intelligence we've been discussing. The source details the narrative that because Maxwell's financial fraud was about to be exposed, bringing complete ruin, he attempted to deploy the second pillar of power to save himself, blackmail.
Who did he try to blackmail?
According to the source, he allegedly attempted to blackmail Mossad. He demanded $400 million to cover the hole in his finances, threatening to release state secrets if they didn't comply.
Wow.
Now, as the source points out, attempting to blackmail one of the most sophisticated, ruthless intelligence agencies in the world is a catastrophic, fatal miscalculation.
It is the ultimate hubris.
It's exactly. Shortly after making these demands, Robert Maxwell was found dead. He supposedly fell off his luxury yacht while cruising in the Mediterranean in 1991. And the name of that yacht, adding a grim layer of irony to the whole affair, was the Lady Ghislaine.
And here is where the source brings up a truly wild piece of corroborating evidence. The interview claims that the reality of Maxwell's death, the fact that he didn't just fall, but was actively assassinated by intelligence services because he became a liability, was actually confirmed in the recently unsealed Epstein files.
That's a huge detail.
The source notes there are communications where Epstein himself acknowledges this reality about his mentor's death.
This extensive historical context is vital for you to understand because it establishes a clear chain of custody for this dark world. It demonstrates that Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just stumble into this world of elite blackmail and human trafficking.
She grew up in it.
According to the source, she inherited a massive, highly sophisticated, high-level intelligence and social network directly from her father. And when her father was eliminated, she, partnering with Jeffrey Epstein, essentially took over the operation, acting as the new brokers of brokers throughout the late 90s and 2000s.
Which brings us to the bizarre, incredibly suspicious anomaly of Jeffrey Epstein himself. When you look at his actual biography, as the source points out, his rise to ultimate global power makes absolutely zero sense. Let's look at the trajectory they map out. In the 1970s, he is a nobody.
Complete unknown.
He has no elite pedigree, no massive family wealth. He is a high school math teacher at the Dalton School in New York. From there, he miraculously gets hired by Bear Stearns, which was one of the most powerful, cutthroat financial institutions on Wall Street at the time, and he is given this incredibly fast-tracked, turbocharged career path to the top.
It is a meteoric rise that defies the standard laws of finance. And to illustrate just how anomalous this is, the source cites the work of Eric Weinstein. Weinstein is a highly respected physicist with deep, intricate ties to Silicon Valley, the hedge fund world, and figures like Peter Thiel. Weinstein decided to rigorously investigate the foundation of Epstein's supposedly brilliant financial career.
And what did Weinstein find when he dug into the numbers?
He found a complete ghost town.
Hmm.
Weinstein pointed out a glaring, impossible red flag. There are absolutely zero Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, records of Jeffrey Epstein's trading career.
For the listener who might not be deep into finance, why is that a smoking gun?
Because if you are a legitimate, high-level trader on Wall Street managing billions of dollars, there is an unavoidable paper trail. You have to register, your trades are logged, your funds are audited. The absolute absence of this regulatory trail strongly implies that Epstein's vast wealth and his immense power were not generated through standard financial markets or brilliant investing.
So if he wasn't making his billions trading on Wall Street like everyone assumed, who was backing him? Where was the capital coming from to fund this massive lifestyle and these global operations? The source points the finger directly at a man named Leslie Wexner.
A very prominent figure.
Wexner is the notoriously reclusive billionaire behind massive global retail giants. We are talking about the founder of Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, and Abercrombie & Fitch. The interview identifies Wexner as the man who essentially launched Epstein into the stratosphere.
The financial relationship between the two, as detailed in the source, is baffling. Wexner reportedly gave Epstein the largest, most expensive private mansion in Manhattan, a property valued at roughly $75 million, and he transferred the deed to Epstein for a grand total of $1.
I just want to pause on that. A $75 million compound in New York City for $1. But it wasn't just real estate, was it?
No. Beyond the unprecedented real estate gift, the source notes that Wexner handed over full control of his entire, vast, multi-billion-dollar fortune for Epstein to manage. He gave him full power of attorney.
The interview finds this completely implausible under normal business conditions, and it's hard to disagree. A self-made billionaire retail magnate does not simply hand over total control of his entire life's work and his empire to a former high school math teacher who possesses no SEC track record.
Unless there were entirely different hidden motivations and forces at play.
Right.
It points to a completely different incentive structure,
Yeah.
likely dictated by the intelligence networks we've been discussing.
And the source is careful to point out that this specific type of operation, these massive, highly protected blackmail rings operating within the elite, are not a phenomenon unique to America or the Epstein network. They're of a global methodology of control.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they cite several other horrifying networks to prove this is a systemic issue. They mention Jimmy Savile in the UK. Savile was a massive television star who operated a prolific, horrific abuse network for over 50 years with access to hospitals, orphanages, and the royal family, all while being completely protected by the British establishment.
That case is just terrifying.
They also mentioned Marc Dutroux in Belgium. This was a horrifying case in the 90s, where the source claims over 30 witnesses mysteriously vanished or died within a 2-year span, pointing to a massive lethal cover-up that reached high into the Belgian state apparatus. They mentioned the De Mink case in the Netherlands involving a high-ranking justice official, and they even referenced the recent massive allegations surrounding figures like P. Diddy in the music industry.
If we pull back and connect this to the overarching theory of the 4 pillars, the source is making a critical defining distinction. They are drawing a hard, bright line between ordinary financially motivated criminal rings, your standard organized crime and state-sponsored honey trap rings.
What is the defining difference? Immunity. Ordinary criminals are eventually prosecuted. State-sponsored rings are protected by the intelligence apparatus, the justice system, and the media because they serve a vital geopolitical function.
They are an asset.
Yes, they are the highly organized mechanisms used to gather the blackmail material needed to control the elite layer of society. They aren't bugs in the system. They are features of the system.
So we've firmly established the blackmail layer, how it operates, and who brokers it. But the interview takes a very dark turn here, arguing that Epstein's specific network was about far, far more than just gathering dirty pictures of politicians to secure a vote. The source details how deeply intertwined this specific network was with high-level finance, cutting-edge science, and global geopolitics.
This is where the narrative expands significantly beyond a standard true crime story and into the realm of global architecture. The source outlines Epstein's intense, well-funded involvement in the absolute highest echelons of the scientific elite. He wasn't just interested in physics. He was deeply focused on transhumanism, eugenics, the concept of designer babies, and radical DNA modification.
That is terrifying. A broker of blackmail funding the genetic alteration of humanity. And he wasn't doing this in a basement. He was doing it out in the open, integrating himself into the most elite scientific circles on the planet. The interview specifically highlights his involvement with a website and a group called edge.org, which was run by a literary agent named John Brockman.
The source describes the individuals associated with edge.org as the smartest of the smartest in Silicon Valley and academia.
Right. Brockman apparently hosted these incredibly exclusive billionaire dinners, starting all the way back in 1999. And at these dinners, you had Jeffrey Epstein, the broker, rubbing shoulders and cutting checks to the top scientific minds in the world.
The level of access is astonishing.
The source mentions revered historical figures like Stephen Hawking and prominent physicists like Lawrence Krauss being pulled into this financial and social orbit. They were exploring incredibly advanced, sometimes highly controversial technologies regarding the future of the human species, funded by compromised money.
And alongside these massive scientific ambitions, the source highlights the staggering level of geopolitical profiteering that is allegedly revealed within the unsealed Epstein files. These networks weren't just passively reacting to world events like regular investors. They were allegedly anticipating, shaping, and profiting from them based on insider state-level intelligence.
The interview gets very specific here. They note that the files reveal advanced knowledge and strategic financial maneuvering regarding major geopolitical crises long before they hit the front pages of the newspapers. They specifically mention the NATO intervention and crisis in Libya in 2011 and the massive conflicts in Ukraine starting around 2014.
It's all connected.
The source notes that these networks were actively using this advanced knowledge to position themselves financially.
The implication is that the intelligence gathered via the blackmail network was being monetized on the global geopolitical stage.
And it gets even more current. The interview explicitly mentions discussions and planning surrounding pandemic responses, citing links within the files to figures like Bill Gates and the World Health Organization. The source suggests there was preparation and strategic financial positioning regarding global health crises well before the global awareness of events like COVID-19.
Now, at this point in the deep dive, the source pauses to address and dismantle a very prominent myth that is heavily circulated in the mainstream media and online forums. The idea that Jeffrey Epstein was secretly a Russian KGB or FSB agent sent to destabilize the West.
Yeah, Yuri logically and systematically tears this narrative apart using two primary documented pieces of evidence. Evidence number one. The source points to a specific email found in the files where Jeffrey Epstein is reaching out to the Prime Minister of Norway, explicitly asking the Prime Minister for an introduction to Vladimir Putin.
It is a simple deduction.
Okay.
As the source rightly points out, if Epstein were actually a high-level, highly valued Russian intelligence agent operating in America, he wouldn't need to email a random Norwegian politician to beg for an introduction to the leader of his own country's government. His handlers would arrange it. It defies basic intelligence logic.
But evidence number two is even more compelling, and it gets right to the heart of how the U.S. justice system operates. It centers on the 2008 prosecution of Epstein in Florida. Prosecutor Alexander Acosta, who later became the Secretary of Labor, gave Epstein a shockingly lenient, completely unprecedented 12-month plea deal.
It was a sweetheart deal.
This was a deal where Epstein was allowed to leave jail 6 days a week to go to his office. He essentially barely saw the inside of a cell for massive federal crimes.
And the context of that deal is everything. When Acosta was aggressively questioned about this sweetheart deal years later during a confirmation hearing, he recordedly stated that he was told by higher-ups to back off the Epstein case because Epstein belonged to intelligence.
And here is the logical kill shot the source delivers regarding the Russian theory. If Epstein belonged to intelligence, and that intelligence was Russian, meaning he was a foreign adversary running a massive blackmail ring against U.S. politicians and military officials, the United States justice system would have locked him away in a dark hole at a black site for the rest of his natural life.
They absolutely would have.
They would have paraded him as a massive counterintelligence victory. They would never, under any circumstances, give a hostile Russian spy a sweetheart plea deal that allowed him to keep operating.
Therefore, the source concludes, Epstein had to be protected by Allied intelligence. To receive that level of systemic immunity from the U.S. Department of Justice, he was operating under the protection of the Western intelligence umbrella. Whether his primary handlers were the CIA, Britain's MI6, or Israel's Mossad, he was fundamentally a Western asset.
This brings us to a really profound, somewhat disturbing realization about what the interview refers to as the informal bureaucracy. We often hear the term deep state thrown around as a buzzword, but Urey defines it functionally.
He uses the political structures of countries like Japan and the U.S. as prime examples. He notes that while there is a formal elected bureaucracy, the people we vote for, the public hearings, the signed legislation, there's a simultaneously an informal power structure. And this informal bureaucracy, fueled by intelligence and unchecked capital, often dictates reality far more effectively than the politicians on the ballot.
The interview paints this incredibly vivid, grim picture. The underworld of organized crime and human trafficking and the upper world of elite finance and politics are not separate entities. They aren't fighting each other. They mingle seamlessly.
They attend the same dinners.
They share state secrets. They coordinate global financial moves. And as the source grimly noted with Robert Maxwell, they even coordinate the physical elimination of uncooperative witnesses.
It is a unified ecosystem of power. But the source argues that this ecosystem, this architecture of power, is currently undergoing a fundamental paradigm-shifting evolution.
Right, and this is where the deep dive moves from the history of blackmail into the terrifying future of technology. The system is moving from the messy, physical, highly risky human layer of blackmail, the Epsteins and the Maxwells, to the cold, hyper-efficient, completely totalizing software layer of digital control.
To truly understand this digital evolution, the source doesn't start with Silicon Valley today. They take us back to the late 70s and 80s, to a piece of software called Promise.
What made Promise so revolutionary at the time?
In the 70s, intelligence agencies, police departments, and financial institutions all had massive databases, but they were siloed. The FBI's computers couldn't talk to the CIA's computers, which couldn't talk to the international banking systems. Promise was revolutionary because it was the first piece of sophisticated software capable of seamlessly linking all these disparate databases.
So it connected the dots.
Suddenly, an intelligence analyst could connect the dots between a bank transfer in Geneva, a flight manifest in London, and a police report in New York in real time. It was the birth of integrated digital surveillance.
But the software allegedly had a secret. The U.S. intelligence apparatus had reportedly installed a back door into Promise, meaning anyone who bought and used the software was secretly funneling all their data right back to U.S. intelligence. And who was the global, jet-setting salesman traveling the world, aggressively peddling this compromised surveillance software to foreign intelligence agencies and governments?
None other than the broker of brokers himself, Robert Maxwell.
The interview highlights this specific connection to show how deeply intertwined the physical human brokers of power were with the initial rollout of the digital surveillance state. Maxwell was using his immense public prestige as a media mogul to sell the very digital panopticon that would eventually render his physical blackmail rings obsolete.
He was selling his own replacement, essentially.
But Promise was just the beta test. The source then fast-forwards us from the 1980s to the post-9/11 world and introduces a company that dominates the space today. Palantir.
Palantir is a massive, incredibly powerful, privately held data analytics company. It was founded by Peter Thiel, the billionaire venture capitalist, and Alex Karp. As the source acutely notes, the name Palantir is highly symbolic. It is derived from the seeing stones in Lord of the Rings mystical stones that allow the user to see across vast distances, peer through walls, and look into the minds and plans of others.
It is a very telling, almost arrogant name for a surveillance company.
And the origins of Palantir are deeply, inextricably tied to the U.S. military-industrial complex and the War on Terror. The interview states that Palantir was essentially born out of a controversial Pentagon and DARPA initiative called Total Information Awareness.
Let's unpack total information awareness because it is exactly what it sounds like. Following 9/11, the goal of the intelligence apparatus wasn't just to track known terrorists. The goal shifted to totalized data collection. They wanted to fuse structured data, which is the neat, organized stuff like your tax records, spreadsheets, and bank statements, with unstructured data.
Unstructured data being the messy stuff.
Exactly. Your private emails, your social media posts, your internet search history, your medical records, and even audio clips of your voice. The goal was to fuse all of this to create a totalizing God's eye view of every individual and network on the planet. And today, Palantir provides exactly this unimaginable capability to the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and agencies like ICE in the United States.
The source puts a massive emphasis on Palantir's staggering influence over the government. They point out that Peter Thiel, who was notably the first major Silicon Valley investor to throw his full weight and financial backing behind the Trump administration, wields immense structural power through this infrastructure.
It's not just an app.
Palantir isn't just an app on a phone. It is the operating system of the state. The source points out that Palantir software is used for everything from managing complex ICE deportations in the U.S. to reportedly assisting the military in advanced drone targeting operations globally. It represents the ultimate terrifying fusion of an unaccountable private tech monopoly and state intelligence power.
But the interview makes sure to remind us that surveillance isn't just about massive macro-level databases tracking populations. It has become highly personal and deeply intrusive at the micro level. The source brings up a highly controversial Israeli cybersecurity firm called the NSO Group and their flagship weaponized software product, Pegasus.
Pegasus is truly the stuff of nightmares. We're all used to the idea of phishing emails. Don't click the sketchy link, right? But the source explains that Pegasus is a zero-click exploit. It can entirely hack into your mobile phone without you ever clicking a link or making a mistake.
Right.
Once it's in, it takes total control.
Total control.
You can silently turn on your camera to watch you, turn on your microphone to listen to your conversations in the room, read all your encrypted messages on apps like WhatsApp or Signal, and the source even claims it has the capability to continue listening and transmitting data even when the phone appears to be completely turned off.
It effectively turns the device in your pocket into a permanent, highly sophisticated intelligence asset working against you. Pegasus was famously exposed as being used to spy on journalists, human rights activists, and even allied world leaders, including the German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
So when you look at the fusion of Palantir's macro databases and Pegasus's micro intrusions, what does this all mean for the concept of privacy? The interview argues that privacy, as we traditionally understood it in the 20th century, is entirely dead. It is an illusion.
And the terrifying leap in this technology, according to Yuri, is explained through two distinct phases. Phase 1 is what he calls rating.
The reading phase is about extracting data from the human subject. The source references a mind-bending presentation at Singularity University from back in 2014. Even back then, over a decade ago, they demonstrated that fMRI brain scans, coupled with AI, could already begin to read human dreams and decode visual thoughts, actually printing out rough images of what the subject was visualizing in their mind.
That sounds like science fiction, but it was 2014. And with the rapid advent of wearable technology, smartwatches tracking our biometrics, augmented reality glasses tracking our eye movements, and highly invasive brain-computer interfaces like Elon Musk's Neuralink, this reading phase is becoming increasingly intimate, continuous, and real-time. The machine knows your heart rate when you look at a specific political ad.
But the source warns that reading is merely the diagnostic phase. Here is where the deep dive gets truly dystopian. Phase 2 is what Yuri calls writing.
Right. Artificial intelligence is no longer just passively reading our data to categorize us. It is actively writing our reality.
It shifts from surveillance to active, preemptive manipulation. The force argues that AI algorithms are now generating sophisticated deepfakes and preemptively manipulating the information diets on our social media feeds with a specific goal to alter our behavior before we even take a conscious action.
How does that work in practice?
If the massive predictive algorithms, perhaps powered by something like Palantir, predict that you, based on your psychological profile, might engage in a protest or vote a certain way or buy a competitor's product, the system doesn't wait for you to do it. It actively nudges your feed. It shows you an article that subtly alters your emotional state, perhaps making you more apathetic or fearful, thereby changing your subsequent actions without you ever realizing your autonomy has been hijacked.
The interview explicitly compares this dynamic to a real-life digital version of the movie Minority Report, punishing or preventing crimes or just unapproved behaviors before they even happen. And Yuri connects this directly back to you, the listener, with a really relatable example. Have you ever simply thought of a specific song or a niche topic and never said it out loud, only to have Spotify or YouTube recommend it to you seconds later?
While we often brush that off as a weird coincidence or confirmation bias, the source argues this is the low-level commercial manifestation of this massive predictive architecture. The AI has modeled your behavior so perfectly that it knows what you want before you consciously articulate it.
The overarching thesis here is staggering. We are rapidly moving from an old-world system of targeted human surveillance aimed at controlling a few powerful elites via messy blackmail to a clean, invisible planetary panopticon aimed at preemptively controlling the psychological behavior of the entire global population.
It is an incredibly heavy, almost paralyzing realization.
Which naturally leads us to the most frustrating question of this entire deep dive. When you hear all of this, the detailed history of the blackmail rings, the staggering financial corruption, the totalizing unconstitutional surveillance, the most obvious question anyone would ask is, why isn't anyone being held accountable?
It's the logical next thought.
We all know the Epstein client list exists. Why hasn't a single high-profile client, politician, or billionaire from that network been arrested and put on trial?
The source addresses this directly, attributing this maddening lack of accountability to a deeply entrenched concept of systemic immunity. To illustrate how the people at the top actually think about this, the interview references a quote attributed to Pam Bondi, a prominent political figure. The quote suggests a deeply cynical mindset prevalent among the ruling elite.
The inherent logic is that exposing the entire unvarnished truth, actually arresting the hundreds of high-profile politicians, CEOs, and intelligence assets implicated in these massive networks, would literally collapse the current global power system.
The interview explicitly compares this logic to the rationale used during the 2008 global financial crisis. Think back to that time. The global economy melted down because of massive, coordinated systemic fraud perpetrated by the major banking institutions. Millions of people lost their homes and livelihoods, but almost no major Wall Street bankers went to jail.
Why? Because the excuse deployed by the government was that the banks were too big to fail. The argument was that if you aggressively prosecuted the massive institutions responsible, you would crash the entire global economy in the process. Justice was deemed too economically dangerous.
Urey argues that the exact same logic is currently applied to elite criminal networks. The network of blackmail, intelligence, and corruption is deemed too big to fail. If you expose the true extent of it, the argument goes, the stock market crashes, faith in every major institution crumbles, governments fall, and society loses faith in the rule of law entirely.
Therefore, to protect the system, true elite power is allowed to sit entirely outside the parameters of the law. They aren't just above the law, they exist in a separate reality.
And this raises a vital structural question about the concept of institutional capture. How can the system police itself? When the very people tasked with investigating these massive systemic crimes, the Department of Justice, the Congressional Oversight Committees, the intelligence watchdogs, are heavily relying on software like Palantir to do their jobs, and Palantir is deeply integrated with the very intelligence and financial networks they are supposedly investigating, justice becomes structurally impossible.
You can't investigate the panopticon using the panopticon software.
Exactly. The system cannot investigate itself when the very tools of investigation and the data itself are owned and controlled by the prime suspects.
And the source extrapolates this concept of capture to a massive geopolitical scale. They argue that currently Europe, and specifically nations like the Netherlands where the speaker is based, are entirely compromised. They describe these European nations as essentially functioning as lapdogs to the United States and its overarching intelligence and tech apparatus.
The speaker strongly advocates for a radical geopolitical detachment. They argue that if Europe wants to survive this era of total control, it must urgently build its own sovereign technological, military, and economic autonomy. The proposed strategy is a delicate balancing act, do business with both the U.S. tech monopolies and the rising Chinese tech state, but rely entirely on neither. Europe must escape the gravitational pull of these compromised, totalizing networks by building its own independent infrastructure.
So that is the macro solution for continents. But what about us? We have just traversed a deeply grim, highly overwhelming landscape of untouchable billionaires, historical blackmail rings, assassinated triple spies, and AI systems reading our minds. It is incredibly easy to listen to this and feel completely hopeless, completely powerless against a machine that big.
It can definitely feel that way.
But the interview does not leave us in a state of despair. They pivot to offer actionable, human-level advice.
This is perhaps the most important part of the deep dive. The source frankly acknowledges that trying to fight these global, virtually untouchable power structures head-on in their arena, trying to out-hack the NSA or outspend Wall Street, is a guaranteed losing battle for the average person. So what is the counter-move for the individual?
The source advises a radical shift in personal focus. Since you cannot control the planetary grid, you must intensely focus on what you can control, your immediate physical environment. They advise focusing on self-love, mental resilience, and crucially, getting to know your literal physical neighbors. The countermove to a digital panopticon is cultivating real, tangible, physical community.
It is about building resilience at the base layer of society. They strongly advise buying local, supporting independent businesses, and actively boycotting massive data harvesting corporate entities whenever practically possible. It is a strategy of starving the beast. You starve it of your financial capital, and more importantly, you starve it of your behavioral data.
Furthermore, they stress the absolute importance of maintaining deep critical awareness. By understanding how these four pillars operate, by recognizing fiction watching in the media, you can ensure you don't inadvertently wander into compromised situations and you become highly resistant to the behavioral manipulation algorithms on your screens.
For those listeners who really want to dig deeper into the historical roots of how these elite structures form, the source highly recommends a specific book, America's Secret Establishment, by the historian Anthony Sutton. This book details the extensive history of how secret societies, specifically focusing on Yale's Skull and Bones, historically recruit from the elite, operate in the shadows, and maintain their grip on generational power across politics and finance. It provides the historical precedent for everything we've discussed today.
The profound, ultimately hopeful insight here is that in an era utterly obsessed with total information awareness and algorithmic prediction, the most radical, disruptive act of rebellion you can commit is entirely analog. Cultivating genuine local human connections, having a conversation over a fence that isn't recorded, paying in cash, reading a physical book, helping a neighbor, these are actions that cannot be digitized, they cannot be tracked, they cannot be fed into an AI predictive algorithm, and they cannot be blackmailed. That analog humanity is the ultimate defense against a digital panopticon.
It is a profound reframing of resistance.
So let's bring this all together. We have gone on an incredible reality-bending journey today. We started by looking at the ancient 5,000-year roots of intelligence gathering and traced how it evolved into four distinct modern pillars of total control data manipulation, human blackmail, structural financial corruption, and ultimate violence. We looked at the psychology of how Hollywood normalizes these terrifying concepts, dissecting that chilling, easily missed final scene in Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. We mapped the dark historical lineage of the brokers of brokers, tracing the power from Meyer Lansky to the triple spy Robert Maxwell and his massive textbook empire, right up to the bizarre, financially impossible, state-protected rise of Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to Leslie Wexner.
We explored the terrifying scientific ambitions of these networks, the eugenics and DNA modifications discussed at the Edge.org billionaire dinners. We dismantled the media myth that Epstein was a Russian asset, realizing through the Acosta plea deal that he was protected by Allied intelligence to gather compromise on Western elites.
And finally, we watched the entire system upgrade itself. We traced the evolution from the physical human blackmail rings of the 90s to the totalizing software surveillance of Promise, Palantir, and Pegasus. We examined an AI system moving from simply reading our minds to actively writing our behaviors, all of it protected by a deeply cynical justice system that deems itself too big to fail.
It is a comprehensive, if disturbing, mapping of a hidden architecture that dictates much of our world. But as we process all of this dense information, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on the trajectory of everything we've discussed today.
Lay it on us.
We have seen how intelligence evolved, from a human spy knowing how a physical piece of paper was folded, to the massive human broker networks of Epstein and Maxwell, to today's AI systems that preemptively alter our psychological behavior.
Yeah.
Historically, the human brokers were absolutely essential because the system required physical, messy blackmail to function.
Right. Someone had to set up the cameras and run the operations.
Exactly. But as artificial intelligence and digital surveillance become completely totalizing, and as AI gains the ability to generate perfect deepfakes and instantly model global behavior, the system no longer needs the human brokers. So the question is, what happens when these predictive AI systems become so unfathomably complex, so rapid, and so autonomous that even the modern-day Epsteins, the Wall Street billionaires, and the directors of global intelligence can no longer understand or control the very architecture of power they built? If the AI is writing the reality, and the human elites are just reacting to the algorithms, who or what is really in charge of the system then?
That is a thought that will absolutely keep you up at night. The architect's becoming obsolete to the architecture. Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the hidden plumbing of global power. We truly hope this exploration has given you a new, sharper lens through which to view the daily news, your relationship with your technology, and the complex world around you. Stay curious, stay deeply critical of the narratives you are handed, and maybe, just maybe, try leaving your phone in another room every once in a while. Until next time.